February 17th, 1600. Rome awakens to the sound of bells, but this is not a celebratory peal. This is a summons to witness death. In the Campo de' Fiori, the Field of Flowers, crowds have been gathering since before dawn. Merchants abandon their stalls, craftsmen leave their work, noble ladies secure windows with the best views. They've all come to watch a man burn. A man who dared to claim that Earth was not the center of the universe, that God was everywhere and nowhere at once, and that the stars themselves were distant suns with their own worlds spinning around them. But the man they've come to see die is more than just a heretic. Giordano Bruno is a symbol of what happens to those who think too much, who see too far, who speak too loudly about things the Church would prefer to keep shrouded in mystery. Today, we strip away the romantic myths and examine the brutal reality of how the Inquisition methodically destroyed not just a man, but the very idea of free thought itself. Popular culture paints Bruno as a martyr for science, a kind of predecessor to Galileo, who died for believing the Earth orbits the Sun. But the truth is far more complex and infinitely more terrifying. Bruno didn't die for heliocentrism. He died for something much greater, for the right of the human mind to explore without boundaries, for the idea of an infinite universe in an age when the Church claimed to know the exact dimensions of God's creation. And for 8 years before the flames touched his flesh, they broke him so methodically, so systematically, that by the time he reached the stake, the brilliant orator and philosopher had been reduced to a shadow. The iron gag forced into his mouth wasn't just an instrument of silence. It was the final humiliation for a man whose words had been his weapons, whose tongue had charmed kings and enraged cardinals. The metal device, specially crafted with spikes that pierced his tongue and palate, ensured that Rome's greatest speaker would die mute. If you think you know this story, forget everything you've heard, because the truth about what happened in the dungeons of the Inquisition for 8 long years will make you reconsider the price humanity pays for every step forward. Filippo Bruno was born in 1548 in Nola, near Naples, the son of a soldier. An ordinary boy from an ordinary family who at 17 made an ordinary choice for that era. He entered the Dominican monastery. It was there he received the name Giordano. It was there his destruction began. Picture a young monk in his cell, reading forbidden books by candlelight. Erasmus hidden under his pillow. Aristotle with Arabic commentaries behind a false wall. The monastery of San Domenico Maggiore in Naples was one of the great centers of learning. But even there, boundaries existed. Bruno didn't just cross these boundaries, he didn't seem to see them at all. The first troubles began when he questioned the Trinity. Not denied, questioned. In 1576, when he was just 28, the first proceedings began against him. 130 points of accusation. The young monk fled the monastery, threw off his habit, and began the wanderings that would last 16 years. Geneva, Paris, London, Wittenberg, Prague. In each city, he lectured, wrote books, debated professors. The Calvinists expelled him for being too Catholic. The Lutherans expelled him for not being Protestant enough. The Catholics expelled him for being too much himself. But what exactly did he say that was so terrifying? Listen carefully, because these ideas cost him his life. The universe is infinite. The stars are distant suns. Around these suns orbit other worlds. On these worlds there might be life. God does not sit on a throne beyond the crystal spheres. He is dissolved in all existence. Matter and spirit are two sides of the same coin. The earth moves. The heavens are not perfect and unchangeable. Human souls might migrate from body to body. Today, this sounds almost banal. Then, it sounded like a declaration of war against the entire structure of reality itself. By 1591, Bruno was tired of running. 16 years of exile, dozens of cities, hundreds of debates. He yearned for Italy, for his native language, for the Italian sun warming his face again. And then appeared Giovanni Mocenigo, a Venetian aristocrat who invited Bruno to teach him the art of memory. Mocenigo seemed like salvation. Venice was an independent republic, proud of its autonomy from Rome. The Venetian Inquisition was known to be softer, more reasonable, more concerned with maintaining trade than burning heretics. Bruno had taught at the University of Padua before. He had friends among the Venetian nobility. After 16 years of looking over his shoulder, he allowed himself to believe he might finally be safe. For 2 months, Mocenigo played the eager student. He attended every lecture, took careful notes, asked penetrating questions about Bruno's memory techniques. The philosopher, starved for genuine intellectual engagement after years of hostile audiences, opened up completely. He shared not just his memory palace methods, but his cosmological theories, his theological doubts, his vision of infinite worlds. Mocenigo wrote it all down. Then, on May 23, 1592, Mocenigo locked Bruno in a room and summoned the Inquisition. The arrest was swift and brutal. Bruno woke to find armed guards in his chamber. His manuscripts were seized, his books confiscated, his personal letters taken as evidence. Why did Mocenigo betray him? Historians still debate this. Perhaps Mocenigo had expected Bruno to teach him literal magic and felt cheated. Perhaps he feared for his soul after hearing Bruno's heresies. Or perhaps he had been an agent of the Inquisition from the beginning, and the invitation had always been a trap. The Venetian trial lasted 8 months. Bruno employed every rhetorical skill he possessed. He recanted minor points to protect major ones. Yes, he had doubted. Yes, he had erred. But he was ready to return to the Church's embrace. The Venetian inquisitors were actually inclined toward leniency, but Rome demanded extradition, and Venice, independent proud Venice, ultimately submitted to papal pressure. February 27, 1593. The iron gates of the Inquisition's prison in Rome closed behind Giordano Bruno. They would open again only for his final journey to the stake. The prison of the Inquisition was not just a building, it was a machine designed to grind down human will. The cell had no windows. A stone box 10 feet by 10 feet, a straw mattress crawling with vermin. A bucket for waste, emptied once a week if the guards remembered. In summer, suffocating heat that made breathing feel like drowning. In winter, cold that penetrated so deep your bones ached constantly. And silence. Absolute, maddening silence, broken only by the screams of other prisoners under interrogation. But physical suffering was just the foundation. The real torture was the interrogations. 75 sessions over 8 years. Imagine being dragged from your cell, blind from darkness, into a hall where cardinals sat in purple robes. They asked questions, the same questions over and over. Do you believe in the Trinity? Do you acknowledge transubstantiation? Do you recant your belief in multiple worlds? The first year, Bruno fought actively. He quoted Augustine and Aquinas, argued that his ideas didn't contradict true faith, that an infinite God must create an infinite universe. The inquisitors listened, recorded everything, then started again. Do you believe in the Trinity? The second year brought the first tortures, not the worst. The Inquisition was saving him for a public recantation. The strappado, suspension by wrists tied behind the back, shoulders dislocating with wet pops. The sudden drop, stopped inches from the floor. The scream that tears from your throat before you can stop it. And again the question, do you recant? By the third year, Bruno began to tire. He offered compromises. Yes, perhaps he was wrong about certain details. Yes, he would acknowledge church authority in matters of faith. But the infinity of the universe wasn't a matter of faith. It was a matter of logic. If God is infinite, how can his creation be finite? The fourth, fifth, and sixth years blurred into one endless nightmare. The interrogations became less frequent, but more intense. They brought in experts to debate him, theologians who picked apart his arguments word by word. When he quoted scripture to support his views, they countered with different interpretations. When he cited church fathers, they produced opposing quotes. It was intellectual torture, designed to make him doubt not just his beliefs, but his own capacity to reason. The Inquisition understood something that modern interrogators have rediscovered. Physical torture has limits, but psychological destruction can be total. They didn't just want Bruno to recant. They wanted him to believe his recantation. The technique was sophisticated. Isolation was punctuated by sudden intense social contact. Weeks of silence followed by days of constant questioning. They brought in fellow Dominicans who had known him in Naples, had them plead with tears for him to save his soul. They read him letters, possibly forged, from family members begging him to recant. They alternated harsh interrogators with kind ones, the classic good inquisitor, bad inquisitor routine. Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, who would later prosecute Galileo, personally conducted several interrogations. Bellarmine was brilliant, perhaps Bruno's intellectual equal. He didn't rant or threaten. He engaged Bruno in genuine theological debate, finding the weak points in his arguments, the places where logic became faith. These sessions were the cruelest of all because they made Bruno doubt himself. By the 7th year, 1599, Bruno was breaking. His health was destroyed. Arthritis from the damp cell made movement agony. Malnutrition had loosened his teeth. Isolation had begun to fragment his once brilliant mind. He offered to recant everything except the infinity of worlds. Just that one point. Surely that wasn't truly heretical. Surely God's grandeur was magnified, not diminished, by an infinite creation. The Inquisition seemed to consider it. Pope Clement VIII himself reviewed the case. For a brief moment, it looked like a compromise might be possible. Bruno would recant his theological errors, maintain his cosmological theories as philosophical speculations rather than truths, and live under house arrest. But then Bellarmine presented a new document, a list of 8 propositions that Bruno must accept without reservation. Not just the Trinity and transubstantiation, but the absolute finitude of the universe, the impossibility of other worlds, the denial that matter and spirit could be one substance. It was total intellectual surrender. Bruno read the propositions. He asked for time to consider. Days passed. The Inquisition waited. Finally, he gave his answer. I do not know what I should retract. I do not want to retract, and I have nothing to retract. The sentence was pronounced on February 8, 1600. Bruno was brought before the full tribunal, weak, barely able to stand, but with eyes that still held defiance. Cardinal Bellarmine read the charges: heresy, blasphemy, practicing divination, denying the virginity of Mary, claiming the existence of multiple worlds, teaching the transmigration of souls. When the death sentence was pronounced, Bruno spoke his last recorded words. Perhaps you pronounce this sentence against me with greater fear than I receive it. The cardinal shifted uncomfortably. Even now, even broken, he could still strike with words. The week between sentencing and execution was carefully orchestrated. The church wanted Bruno's death to be a spectacle, a teaching moment for all of Rome. Pamphlets were distributed describing his heresies in lurid detail. Preachers sermonized about the dangers of intellectual pride. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who think themselves wiser than Holy Mother Church. The morning of February 17th arrived gray and cold. Bruno was awakened before dawn, offered last rites which he refused. The procession formed at the prison. Unlike common criminals who were carted to execution, Bruno would walk, maximizing his public humiliation. But first, the iron gag. The device was specially made, a metal framework that enclosed the head with an iron spike driven through the tongue. Some accounts say it pierced his palate as well. Blood ran down his chin as they secured it. The procession moved slowly through Rome's streets. Monks chanted prayers for his soul. Members of the Confraternity of St. John the Beheaded, whose job was to comfort the condemned, walked beside him holding images of Christ before his eyes. Bruno couldn't speak, but witnesses said his eyes remained focused straight ahead, neither looking at the images nor acknowledging the crowd. The Campo de' Fiori was packed. Vendors sold wine and food. Parents lifted children on their shoulders for a better view. The stake had been erected in the center of the square, surrounded by bundles of wood and straw. But this wasn't going to be a quick death. The executioners had been instructed to use green wood, which burns slower and produces more smoke. The suffering would be prolonged. They stripped Bruno naked, a final humiliation for a man who had once dressed in the finest academic robes of Oxford and Paris. They tied him to the stake with iron chains, not rope that might burn through and allow him to escape the flames. A priest held up a crucifix one last time. Bruno turned his head away. The fire was lit at the base of the pyre, greenwood as ordered, creating thick smoke that made Bruno cough violently, the iron gag preventing him from clearing his throat. The flames rose slowly. First his feet, the skin blistering and blackening. Witnesses close enough could hear the fat sizzling, see the flesh pulling away from bone. The smell of burning human meat filled the square, making some spectators vomit despite their bloodthirsty anticipation. As the flames climbed higher, reaching his thighs, something unexpected happened. The heat caused the muscles to contract, making Bruno's body appear to move, to writhe. The crowd gasped, some claiming they saw him trying to speak despite the gag, others insisting he was attempting to reach toward heaven. The truth was simply biology, muscles contracting in extreme heat, but it added to the horror of the scene. It took nearly 30 minutes for Bruno to die, 30 minutes of agony that witnesses said felt like hours. When his movements finally ceased, when the screaming of superheated air escaping his lungs stopped sounding almost like words, the executioners added more wood. The body had to be completely consumed. No relics could remain that might become objects of veneration. The ashes were scattered in the Tiber River. The church wanted nothing left of Giordano Bruno but the memory of his destruction. They succeeded in destroying his body. They failed catastrophically at destroying his ideas. The immediate aftermath of Bruno's execution was exactly what the church intended: terror. Other freethinkers across Europe heard the message clearly. Galileo, who had been corresponding with some of the same intellectuals as Bruno, became notably more cautious in his writings. The execution cast a chill over intellectual discourse that would last for decades, but the church had made a critical miscalculation. By making Bruno's execution so public, so brutal, so theatrical, they had created a martyr. Within years, illegal pamphlets began circulating containing Bruno's ideas. The harder the church tried to suppress them, the more attractive they became to rebellious minds. The scientific revolution that followed couldn't help but be influenced by Bruno's sacrifice. When Galileo faced his own trial in 1633, he had Bruno's fate before him as a warning. He recanted, chose life under house arrest over death at the stake, but he also reportedly muttered, "Eppur si muove." And yet it moves, a defiance that echoed Bruno's final words about his judge's fear. As telescopes improved and astronomers discovered more and more stars, Bruno's infinite universe began to seem less like heresy and more like observation. When William Herschel discovered Uranus in 1781, expanding the known solar system, he explicitly referenced Bruno's vision of infinite worlds. When Friedrich Bessel measured the first stellar parallax in 1838, proving stars were suns at vast distances, Bruno's name was invoked. The Catholic Church's relationship with Bruno remained complicated for centuries. They couldn't deny the execution happened. It was too well documented. They couldn't claim he was guilty of actual crimes. He had only spoken and written ideas. In 1889, a statue of Bruno was erected in the Campo de' Fiori, exactly where he had burned. The Vatican protested, but the statue stands to this day. In 1942, Cardinal Giovanni Mercati found the lost documents of Bruno's trial in the Vatican secret archives. Their publication revealed the full extent of the Inquisition's methods, the sophistication of their psychological torture, the intellectual rigor with which they had pursued a man whose only crime was thinking differently. The documents showed that Bruno had been offered multiple chances to recant, that the Church had genuinely wanted him to submit rather than die. But they also showed that what they demanded was nothing less than the complete surrender of his mind. Here's the cosmic irony that would have made Bruno laugh through his iron gag. He was right about almost everything. The universe is, for all practical purposes, infinite. The stars are indeed distant suns. Those suns do have planets orbiting them. We've now confirmed over 5,000 exoplanets and counting. Some of them are in the habitable zone where life could exist. In 2000, on the 400th anniversary of Bruno's death, Pope John Paul II expressed profound regret for the execution, but stopped short of rehabilitating Bruno or admitting the Church was wrong. Cardinal Angelo Sodano called Bruno's death a sad episode, but maintained that his theological ideas were still problematic. The Church could admit to excessive punishment, but not to being fundamentally wrong about the nature of reality. Modern cosmologists invoke Bruno when discussing the multiverse, infinite parallel universes, and the possibility that our universe is just one bubble in an infinite foam of realities. His philosophical insights about the unity of matter and energy presaged Einstein. His ideas about the relativity of motion anticipated fundamental principles of modern physics. The man who was burned for heresy is now required reading in many philosophy of science courses. But here's what's truly remarkable. Bruno wasn't a scientist in the modern sense. He never looked through a telescope. They hadn't been invented yet. He didn't do mathematical calculations to support his theories. He arrived at his vision of the cosmos through pure reasoning and intuition. He saw infinity not through a lens, but through logic. And that, perhaps, is what made him so dangerous. He proved that the human mind, unshackled from dogma, could discover truth through thought alone. As we sit here 4 centuries later, with devices in our pockets that can access the sum of human knowledge, it's easy to forget that every piece of that knowledge was paid for in blood. Bruno's blood, Galileo's freedom, countless unnamed thinkers who were silenced before their ideas could spread. The execution of Giordano Bruno is not just a historical curiosity, it's a warning that echoes through time. Every generation faces its own version of the Inquisition. Not always religious, not always violent, but always present. The forces that fear free thought, that demand conformity, that insist reality must fit within prescribed boundaries. They change their clothes, their methods, their justifications, but their goal remains the same: to put an iron gag on the human mind. Bruno could have lived. All he had to do was lie, say words he didn't believe, pretend to see a small, comfortable universe with Earth at its center and humanity as its purpose. He could have had a comfortable life, perhaps even continued his studies in private. No one would have blamed him. The words of recantation meant nothing if not believed. But Bruno understood something the Inquisition didn't. Ideas are more powerful than fire. You can burn the man who speaks them, but once spoken, ideas take on a life of their own. They hide in minds, spread through whispers, resurface in unexpected places. The universe doesn't become smaller because you kill the man who called it infinite. So, here's a question for you. Watching this in the comfort of your home, what truths are you afraid to speak? What realities do you see that contradict the comfortable consensus? What iron gags do we accept without even feeling their weight? Because the spirit of the Inquisition didn't die with the medieval world. It just got better at disguising itself. Today, the Campo dei Fiori is a bustling market square. Tourists buy flowers and vegetables where Bruno burned. cafes serve espresso where the crowd once bayed for blood. And in the center stands his statue, hooded and grim, holding a book, looking toward the Vatican. On the base of the statue is inscribed, "To Bruno, from the century he foresaw, here where the fire burned." Every February 17th, freethinkers from around the world gather to lay flowers at the statue's base. Scientists, philosophers, atheists, and even some progressive Catholics come to honor not just the man, but the principle he died for, that truth cannot be chained, that reality doesn't care about our comfort, and that the universe is always larger than our ability to comprehend it. The flowers they leave are usually roses, red for the blood he shed, white for the truth he spoke, and yellow for the stars he knew were suns. By evening, the statue is surrounded by hundreds of bouquets. By morning, the city workers have cleared them away. But the next year, the flowers return, as inevitable as the sunrise, as infinite as the cosmos Bruno died to describe. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that free thought is worth defending, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you speak when silence would be safer, every time you refuse to let your mind be caged, you honor not just Giordano Bruno, but everyone who has ever paid the price for tomorrow's freedom. The universe is infinite. The stars are distant suns. And somewhere, perhaps on a world orbiting one of those distant suns, other minds are looking up at their night sky, wondering if they're alone, ready to die for the truth of their own infinity. Bruno knew he would never see that future, but he could see it coming as clearly as the flames rising toward him. And in his final moments, through the iron gag, past the pain, beyond the smoke and screams, he smiled, because he knew something his executioners didn't. Fire burns wood and flesh, but it also lights the darkness, and once lit, some fires can never be extinguished.